Today we're going to be talking about all things tipping, also known as gratuity. And this is a topic that we felt like we really needed to cover because Sharon says it comes up all the time, and Michael did too, that it comes up all the time when meeting with brides, engaged couples, parents, etc. And I know this is going to be kind of out of our norm of what we give about tips, wedding planning tips and things like that. But this is one of those things, Sharon, that is really discussed a lot, and there might not be that much information out there. It's not talked about a whole lot.
With every wedding that I do, usually about a month out when we have our final meetings and we're trying to tie everything up with a bow, I'll get asked by the bride or the mother of the bride about how to leave a gratuity and who they're supposed to tip and how much they're supposed to tip. It's something that comes up every single event.
Well, and Mike, I know you've been in this business the longest of all of us here. And we had a conversation about this topic before we even started recording. And we were kind of all over the map on this. And gosh, there's just so many different angles, but where do you want to start?
Well, I mean, when it comes to tipping, every vendor is different. Especially when you talk about food, that's a given that you're going to give a tip to your servers and that type of thing. But what's really important is make sure you check your contracts from your vendor or your caterer to make sure that tip is not already included. There is a few that does not in their contract say, they require 18 to 20%, but that's something that they do after the wedding is over or after the service is over. But just keep in mind, they don't add that to their contract, so you have to be aware of that. And that's when a good wedding planner comes in that already knows what that contract says, and you should not be bombarded or surprised by that because that's something that you're going to automatically have to have at the end of the night of the wedding.
Well, so when we're talking about wedding budgets, gratuities need to be considered in that for some vendors. And this is where it gets probably a little bit of a gray area, but I think a point you just made is really important. And this is a side note to gratuities or tipping. Check your contracts. Wherever you're listening to us from, take the time to read over the contracts and make sure you know what's involved and what's included, what's not included, and don't hesitate to ask questions.
For example, most catering contracts, like Mike was saying, will have an 18 to 20% gratuity already factored in. The question you want to ask is that gratuity going to the actual people that are serving my guest on the night of the event?
Ooh, that's a really good point.
And then if so, that's great. But a lot of the times it's just going to the company. So you want to also take care of the servers that are actually working at your event. Another thing is when you look at a bartending contract, most of those contracts will ask you if you're okay with your bartenders having a tip jar. So if they have a tip jar, then you don't need to worry about tipping them as much as if you think it's not cool to have an open bar and be providing your guests with free alcohol and still asking them to tip. So a lot of couples choose not to let the bartenders have a tip jar, but they will take care of the tip themselves.
That's pretty interesting. I hadn't even thought about that. So some people they're providing beer, wine, alcohol, whatever their bar, whatever's included. The question is to leave a tip jar or not.
Right.
I don't think it's me personally. If I was hiring a bartender and a bar staff, I mean, I wouldn't mind for them to have a tip jar, but I would also automatically plan on tipping them myself.
At least something.
At least something, because really, I mean, they're taking care of people just like, if they're at their restaurant or at their work or whatever. And I think that's just extra for them. I think that's a nice gesture. That's the way I look at it.
Well, and I think too is it's also a way of expressing your appreciation for their service. And so, that's an interesting point, Sharon. I hadn't thought about that. So, if it's cash bar, is it up to do you feel like it's up to the bar service whether they put out a tip jar or not?
It's never up to the bar service, it's always up to the client. It's something that needs discussed beforehand. And most people are okay, like Mike was saying, with a tip jar, but I have had clients that say, we don't wanna ask our guests to spend anything, so we're gonna take care of the tip, we'll take care of it all. Most times with a cash bar, there is a tip jar. But it's very rare anymore to see a wedding with a cash bar.
Okay, so we've mentioned about catering and we've mentioned about bar service. And I would think that that's something that is, I want to say, you would assume that that's what people would think, that these would be the ones that would get tipped. But I hate using that word assume, because a lot of times this is something, maybe people haven't gotten married before, or it's been a long time since their parents have gotten married. So I always hate to use that word assume.
What I tell my clients is reward extraordinary effort. If you feel like a vendor just went above and beyond for you and made your day easier or your event more spectacular, then reward that effort.
So with you being a wedding planner, and I mean, I know this is something that you have in your contract, so it's not the bride and all them and the mother is not sidetracked by it. So do they give you an envelope before the wedding starts and you pass the envelopes out, or does the vendor expect it to come from the bride or the mom?
I leave it up to my client what they want to do. In Aisle Planner, the planning software that I use that I talk about so often, there's a notes section, and I can put any information I want in there. So in that notes section is a gratuity guideline that my clients can look off of, and something I ask them to do if they want me to pass out the tips for them, which 99% of my clients want me to, is that they place their tip. It needs to be in a sealed envelope with the name of the vendor on the front of the envelope, because I don't want anyone thinking I took any of their tips, so a sealed envelope. And then I like to pass those out to the vendors when they first come to the event, when I first see them, so that they know that they were appreciated and they know that the client has respect for what they're doing, and just so we start off on a good tone. I like to pass tips out at the beginning of the event. If the client wants to pass them out, sometimes the mother of the bride or the father of the bride will want to pass them out. So I again ask them to put them in a sealed envelope and give them to the vendor themselves.
So being say I'm a couple getting married and we're sitting down with you, is there a percentage that we should automatically think of when I'm writing checks out for tips or giving cash or whatever it may be? How do you prepare that?
Now wait a second, Mike, you already know the answer to that. Sharon plans out everything. So you know she probably has some kind of guideline or cheat sheet to go off of. You know that.
It's a really good question, and again, tips are subjective. They're never expected but always appreciated. But I do have some general guidelines. I usually say for your hair and makeup artist, you want it to be 15 to 20% of the total bill. For a ceremony musician, $20 to $25 a person. Photographer, videographer, $50 to $100 each. You want to make sure you tip your drivers if you have a party bus or transportation. 15 to 20% of the total bill, but check that contract, because a lot of the times on a transportation contract it's already built in. DJs usually $50 to $150. Valet, the general guideline here where we're from is $1 per car. So if you're asking them to park 150 cars, then you would give $150 to be divided amongst your valets.
And again, this is recommendations off pretty much our area. The Louisville, Kentucky, Southern Indiana area is where these recommendations
One
are.
area that usually gets confusing is your officiant. Because if your officiant is a member of the clergy, I do a lot of Catholic church weddings, they usually request a donation to the church, and the church will have a guideline for the amount of that donation. If your officiant is not a member of the clergy, then it's usually like $50 to $150 on top of what the fee is for that person.
Now, Christina, do you notice that after looking at her list, almost every vendor's listed on here except for florist?
Mike,
So
I
what's
will
up with
say
that?
that I do see that, even though you called that out ahead of time, I do see that on here.
Wedding
But-
planner's not on the list either.
So, but I think what you're trying to show people here, and I think it's great that you've put this together for people that you work with. I think what you're trying to do is start the conversation, start their wheels turning, where if they may not have thought about tipping, is really what I see you've done here, because it goes back to what you said. Say, here we got to talk about Mike again. Say Mike is the florist, but he didn't just do your bouquet or the boutonnieres. He came in and set up pipe and drape and did all of these elaborate centerpieces and also did stuff to the cake and things like that. Really went above and beyond, because he also had to deliver it there. He had to maneuver around other people's schedules, but he really did a great job. That might be something that, when you mentioned in the beginning, that you want to show your appreciation by providing a tip.
Anyone that you feel went, the vendor categories I have listed are vendors that pretty much get tipped every single event. But anytime someone goes above and beyond, I feel like that effort should be recognized.
And actually, I really do not expect to be tipped. I mean, I do get tipped every now and then. Actually, all of my Sharon's weddings, I get tipped from them.
But yet you're mentioning something about not being on the sheet.
Yeah, really.
He just likes to.
But I tell you what, I mean, I really don't expect it. I think it's a nice gesture, and I really appreciate it. But it's not something that's
Well, when I meet
expected
with
for
my
me.
clients, you know, I advise them just like what I just said. Think about who went above and beyond, and then if that, you know, if Mike's the florist and that comes up, then of course they would want to recognize that. Honestly, though, as a wedding planner, I get a lot of gifts. I'll get a thank you note and a gift after the event. But the best thing you can do for me is give me a big hug, tell me you had a perfect day, and then write me a good review.
I agree. I would
Most
rather have a
vendors-
review.
Most vendors live and die by those reviews.
Well, and so I want to talk about something that was mentioned right before we started recording. And that's this expecting. Okay? And, you know, again, we work with a lot of different types of vendors. So when we're talking about this isn't directed any one way or the other, but this expecting. You know, if you don't have it mandatory in your contract, and if someone doesn't, and you don't get a tip, then what? You know, you haven't put it in your contract. And that's where, to me, when our conversation was happening right before we recorded, I definitely don't feel like it's something you say something about or you
No.
question your customer.
If it's something you feel like you have to have, say, for example, a caterer, and she knows she's going to have a team of 4 to 5 people at that wedding, and you want to make sure those people are taken care of, then it should be in your contract that you require, you know, we'll just say 20%, a 20% tip. But that tip should then be given to the people that are actually working the event.
And see, that's something that stood out to me when we were talking, is about if you're having, whether there's a pandemic or not, whatever type of food service you're having, plated or seated, whatever the wording is, buffet, you know, you have people that are cleaning up. Most of the time that's the catering staff, so to speak. But you have a team of 4 or 5 people there. I think you make a good point. Those are the people there that are working your event. And it goes back to what you were saying about the sealed envelopes and being able to hand it to those specific people. But if it's not in your contract, I just don't feel like you should be, I don't want to use the word let down, but I definitely don't think you should pass a line where you're offended that they didn't give you a
If
tip.
it's not in your contract and you get it, then it should be so much appreciated. But it should
For
not
your
be,
efforts.
It should not be expected.
Because if it's approached that you're unhappy with it, and say the caterer wasn't happy with what was, you know, was happy with the tip they were given, and they approach the mother or the bride or whoever, I feel like that's a big negative if it's not, approached
It's also a very
upfront.
awkward thing that you don't want to deal with on wedding day. That's why I have my clients give me the tips at rehearsal, because I don't want to talk about money on wedding day. I don't want
You're supposed to
deal
be enjoying
Right.
that day and not be focused on it.
Well, I think if it's not in your contract, going back to what you said, if it's not in your contract and the family decided to give you $100 and you felt like that was not enough, that's too bad.
Well, I think
Because
then
really-
you should review your own business contract.
If you feel like you're not charging enough, if you feel like you're not charging what you're worth and you're not charging enough, then raise your prices, but it's not something you should expect a family to pick up on and get.
Well, and if I was unhappy and if I was the person receiving the tip and I was unhappy with it, I sure wouldn't say nothing about it, because how many people, if that I approached that mom, and how many people is that mom going to go and tell? Can you believe they came and asked me for $400 more or whatever
Or
it may
pull
be,
me away from my
or pull
daughter's
me away
reception.
from my event to tell me that?
Well, and I think, to be honest, and this might come because I'm in marketing and things, but probably right then and there, it might not sink in. But
But
that
later it
following
will.
week, and then what does that turn into? Does that turn into a negative review on Google, social media, what have you? Because those are so valuable, because a lot of times people make decisions or narrow down their wedding vendors by what they see online.
Well, and as a wedding professional, for example, I can just use my own business. I have an assistant at pretty much every wedding I do. I have at least one assistant. I know that it's my responsibility to see that that assistant is compensated, and compensated well.
and not based off the tip that is
Right.
received.
So when I write my proposal for what it's gonna cost me to do an event, that assistant's salary is factored in. Therefore, I'm not taking care of my people based on whether or not we get a tip. So I feel like that should be the same for any vendor. Charge enough to take care of your people so that you're not dependent upon a tip you may or may not get.
Because right then and there, you're already in the mindset that you're assuming or you're expecting to receive
Right.
18 to 20% tip. And that just, to me, when we were having that conversation, is I can see where without a guide, without a planner, without something to go off of, if you're not in the wedding business or have gotten married or had multiple kids get married, this isn't something you deal with every day.
No. I think they need to take this as a learning experience.
You mean our podcast episode can provide insight and useful information?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
The story we were talking about, it bothers me, because just to think about if I owned a business and one of my employees went up and said, hey, I should have $400 more, whatever it was. And I found out that my employee approached the mother of the bride.
Or
with
whoever
that,
was
or
in charge of
whoever
the
was
event.
in charge of it. Oh my gosh, that would
It's an immediate
actually, that would
termination.
devastate me. That would absolutely devastate me, especially because I work so hard to get every bride that we get, or we have.
You're really embarrassed
And
that
then
someone acted like that.
Exactly. That's a reflection on the company. And really, it was something that came from someone that worked for me, but don't take pride in the company. And that person would not be working for me anymore.
It really, to me, would go, forget about termination. It's back to what you said, your reputation, all the hard work for many years, however long. Right in that instant, an employee could really cause problems
Yeah.
for future events.
Well, and I think that's why this is a good topic to have. It's a little bitty topic, but I mean, it's an important topic
It's a small topic that can cause big problems.
And I think it's great that this will educate
Mhm.
brides, grooms, and families to deal with it up front. And if it's not in writing, then you'll know how to deal with it later.
I think the thing that's the most important to my clients when we talk about it, they want their vendor team to feel appreciated. Even brides that are on a super tight budget and they can't afford to give the big tips, they want that vendor team to know they're appreciated. I have a little box at home that I keep thank you notes from my clients in, and that means the world to me. It means as much to me as giving me $100 tip. That they took the time to write me a thank you note. I think there are a lot of ways to make your vendor team feel appreciated, but I also think it's really important to my client who's getting the tip, and that's something you have to ask, because so many contracts have it built in, like we were saying, and then it doesn't go to the people who are actually handing the plate out at the event, or actually, doing the coat check at the event. So you want to make sure if you're tipping that you're tipping the people that are actually serving you at your event, and not a big company where the owner probably never stepped foot in your event.
But like you said earlier, for my business, tipping, that's not a life or death to me. I would rather have a review or a thank you card. I've been doing this for 32 years and I've got the same box that I put all of my thank you cards in. It's massive. I just automatically add it to it. And sometimes I'll pull them out and read them. And that means a lot, just the things that they say.
I did a wedding back in September, and it was not a high budget wedding at all. But I got a thank you card, and the whole family had signed it. The bride, the groom, the mother, the maid of honor, the whole family had signed it. And that made my whole month. Like, I loved that.
I'm going to say one more thing. This is negative towards what we're talking about. But, I think I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it. You become very close to this family.
It's a relationship.
Sometimes it's a year. And I guess
or more.
And what really bothers me is not about a thank you card or the money as a tip, but when they don't recognize you at all. I think I have worked with families day in and day night, over and over and over. And even when it's over, sometimes you don't even get a thank you. I think that's important to teach bride and grooms and people that's listening to this podcast. Even if it is just a one little liner, Mike, thanks for everything you've done, or just a note on Facebook, or
it's just an acknowledgement.
An email. It doesn't matter. Just to let them know, or that you were appreciated.
One of the things I love the most too is when they share a picture from their wedding. Tag every single person that played a part in your day. Not just your wedding planner, not just your caterer, but not just the venue, because that's where the picture was taken, but tag that whole vendor team. You're doing so much for them. You're letting them know personally that you recognized their effort, but you're also getting their name out there. You're telling the world, hey, they did a great job. And that means so much to me.
And that's where the new generation is coming into, with the Instagram and the Facebook and TikTok and all that. And I do get, there's different websites, wedding formal resale and that kind of thing, and I get a lot of referrals on there. And even if I don't get a thank you card or a tip from them, just them mentioning, referring me to another bride, that means a lot to me, a whole lot.
And it's not, the tipping thing let me get my wording right here, is not just monetary. Like
Right.
Sharon mentioned,
Exactly.
a handwritten note, thank you note, a gift, anything, referring business. It's about that nod, that acknowledgement that they appreciate the work, effort you put in to making their day special.
Just that they acknowledge, your
That you
effort.
were there.
Mhm.
You acknowledge it.
But
I had a
I
part to
have
play.
to say, I've been so blessed with really, really, really sweet couples, and I don't think I've ever left a wedding without a thank you. Because I'm there at the end.
Right. And that's the thing with me. I'm not.
You're
I
not
mean,
there
I
at the
show
end.
up and I disappear, and then it's like I'm gone. I've done my job. I'm
Where'd these
gone.
flowers come
Now,
from?
when I go back at 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning and pick things up, and then there's people still there, and the bride's there, and the mom. Oh yes, I get thank yous and all that. It's just that sometimes you work really hard for people and it's like, thank you. But then I have to step back and think and look, I was hired help. I did exactly what that family asked me to do. So I look at it that way too.
Absolutely. And I think this has been a great topic. I know it was one that we wanted to make sure that we handled appropriately, and these are just recommendations, and these are topics that we're discussing our experience, our expertise to help provide you some good information to help with your wedding planning, all that different things. That's what this podcast is about. So we would love to hear from you on topics that you would like to hear more about or us to discuss on the podcast. You can send us an email. You can go to our website. Mike knows the address, right, Mike? What is that?
The ring, the blings, and all the things.com.
He loves to add characters to our website, doesn't he, Sharon? But so you can actually just drop us a line about topics that you want to hear or you want us to cover. Some topics are much longer than others. You know, we have some topics coming up that maybe just kind of short and sweet, so to speak, but it just drives home the point, and that we don't need to talk for you all might like to listen to us, but we might not have that much to cover on it. And plus, you can now see the video recording of our podcast episode. It was really Sharon's idea. She was so excited about doing a video. So make sure you go to our YouTube channel to check that out, and feel free to share it out. But we appreciate everybody tuning in and listening, but we'd love to hear your feedback, and you can do any of that on our website.
The ring, the bling, and all the things.com.
Yay.
Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, see ya.
This episode of The Ring, the Bling, and All the Things was brought to you by The Wedding Experts, whose mission is to connect engaged couples easily and efficiently to local wedding experts. Visit theweddingexperts.love to connect with your local wedding vendors, as well as access valuable resources to help you plan all the details for your big day. If you are a wedding professional, there are affordable and effective advertising opportunities available to you by visiting theweddingexperts.love/advertise.